Alright, small project I hope. My Fluke 77, which is my primary multimeter in my, at least digital multimeter in my lab, even though it's really the least of the fairly contemporary ones that I have in terms of accuracy and so on. It's just the quickest and easiest to use, so it's my primary meter. And I do send it back to Fluke every so often, and they recalibrate it, or at least verify its calibration. And I've always had trouble with it because it's sitting upright on its little kickstand. Right now it's just sitting on this bracket I made, but you know, I'd be reaching for it, it'd be shifting around and so on. It just wasn't very stable that way. Stable to hold itself in a position for reading the display, but not stable if you're one hand making adjustments and so on. So I tried to come up with, now it won't come off of there, of course. There we go. I'd made this little hastily conceived and hastily manufactured aluminum bracket with some sandpaper on the bottom. Hopefully it wouldn't slide, but the meter isn't heavy enough to get much of a additional friction from that. And I thought I was being clever by sculpting the bottom to fit the shape of the meter, or the meter's holster. And well, that fit, but now there was no support under here, and so it wanted to tip forward. So that wasn't working too great, and then of course it was less stable than before, so I need to do something a little better. So one thing that's going to help is to give it more surface area, so more friction against sliding, and just a wider base so it's less likely to tip, or at least the base is less likely to tip a rock. And then I have to come up with some way to hold the meter in its holster with kickstand within that base so that it doesn't shift around on that, and find some way to more or less anchor it to that, and probably come up with something adjustable so I can fine-tune the angle a little bit and see what I can come up with. Okay, I've done my design here, and I'm following my usual self-imposed restrictions, that in this instance I'm trying to use only stuff I've got laying around without going out and buying anything. So in order to have a deep enough cradle for the base of the meter to sit in, I've selected a 3/4 inch deep channel, which means a piece of 3/4 inch thick wood. And I have a piece of scrap here that I most recently put something on to paint. And but it's adequately large. Once I cut away the garbage, it should be fine. And then underneath it's going to be a double layer glue laminated just to get up the thickness, and it'll be a couple pieces of this craft plywood, which are nominally 1/8 of an inch thick. Together they're just a hair less than that, so it's just a bit less than a 1/4 inch total thickness. As it turns out, one of these boards is about the same thickness as an what is that, 832 nut. So since I'm going to have a pan head, or truss head rather, screw going in from the top, and I needed to keep that within the length I had in my junk box. The piece here can be, so this ended up being a 1/4 inch thick, and I do have a scrap, a tiny scrap of 1/4 inch craft plywood, which is big enough. And I'll set the nut into the lower layer of the 1/8 inch plywood and glue it in place, and then the truss head bolt will clamp this piece down to that. But here's a top view of this piece. It'll have a long slot cut in it, and it can move 1.25 inches in this direction, so this goes over to here. And this will be just a simple rectangle, except then I'll cut it out to an angle on one face of it. and this will allow this whole block to move this way, and that allows a change of angle of the meter. And then there's the cutout here that the base of the cradle of the meter will sit into, and it's just the right width, and the depth doesn't change that much depending on a few degrees of meter tilt, so it should sit in there pretty well. It shouldn't skate out of it because there's a 3/4 inch wall around it. And if I find out empirically that this needs to be taller, I can always add on some little pieces right around here to make a deeper channel for the kickstand of the meter. But then let's see. Yeah, so then I also plan to face it. I've got these dashed lines here going around 3 sides. Those would be the visible sides. So after I cut out the big cutout here and the cutout here and glue everything together, then I'll probably use the table saw to shear off a little bit and therefore make nice clean faces instead of the rough glued faces. And then I'm going to get some, I've got some oak board, some scraps that I can cut down and plane to the right thickness and laminate those on around the faces just to hide the edges of the plywood and make it look decent, and then I can probably varnish the whole thing. And it should match the test equipment support table that the whole thing is resting on. So I've just cleaned up this one edge on the table saw. Now I'm going to use that this way to make a clean edge and a right angle. So now I've got to measure this down. Find my pencil to 7 inches. Let's see. Yeah. Okay, that's my main piece, 7 by 4. Check it against my template. This has a sanity check, that's good. So now I have to make my primary cutouts in this piece. Okay, I've got that piece marked for cutting, and I'm going to use my scroll saw for this. I'm going to cut these pieces up. They're both flat on that side, so I shouldn't have to do much with those. Let's see how the other side looks. Those look even better. Okay, so that's the side I'm going to put up against the fence. And I've already got it set to 4 inches. Okay, got it set for 7 inches. And I don't like to cut up against the fence like that. That's not a safe technique, so I'm just using it to mark where the board's going to be. Okay, so now I've got these 2 pieces that are ostensibly 1/8 of an inch thick. And if I stack those and stack this, they should all be the same size. Looks pretty good. Again, after these are glued up, I'm going to be trimming off 3 sides a little bit, so exact alignment is not critical at this point. But I do want to prepare the bottom plate here for the recessed nut. I want to do that before I laminate everything up. Okay, I've cut out my template and laid it over the wood. I'm going to use a center punch to mark the locations of the 2 holes for the slot on the one piece. Or actually, the slot isn't going to go on here. I'm getting ahead of myself. All I need to do is mark the center of this one. Okay, I've center punched both of these. It's a 3/8 inch Forstner bit. Should fit the nut for a number 8 screw. Alright, let's see here. Putting a couple of brad nails in here just to keep the pieces from sliding around with that double layer of glue. Yeah, that seems to have done the trick. Now I've got to clean up that glue that's squeezed out before it dries too much. Get at it with the Q-tips. Okay, I'm just taking this scrap here. One side is clean and flat, so I'm going to square up this side. Okay, now that I've got that, I've got to cut it down to the size that's going to fit into here. Well, it doesn't quite fit in there as I figured it wouldn't. It needs to be trimmed a little bit. If I'd been thinking better, I would have sanded these before I laminated it. So I'm going to use my Dremel Multimax to try to get in there and sand it some anyway. So this piece now slides in there pretty nice, but I'm going to take it down just a hair more over here because once I put some varnish on it, there will be a little bit of swelling, and it'll also make the surface just a little bit deeper. So I want to just sand that off or trim it ever so slightly on the table saw, one or the other. Probably just sand it. And have to verify where my center is from that hole, and then make the slot on here. Actually, the slot this way for adjustment and the slot this way for the kickstand. I've got a clearance drill in here for a number 8. Loose clearance as opposed to tight clearance, otherwise it'll be too bindy, I think. And now I'm going to drill it out with a closer tolerance drill bit for the number 8 in the place where I've marked the hole. Okay, there's that hole, and I have to clean this up a little bit. Okay, I've pushed in the nut there. There's a little breakout on the back. At least that's not a cosmetic issue. And now I can thread the truss head screw in there. But first I'm going to put the plate in. Okay. Come on. So everything worked out that way, and all I have to do to lock it in place is just snug that down a little bit, and then it's not going anywhere. A little bit of epoxy on the nut just to make sure it doesn't fall out when I loosen it, and I should be good to go in that regard. Okay, I've got the location of the slots for the kickstand to sit in marked. Now I have to do the same bit with drilling out the ends and using the scroll saw to cut it out in the middle. Alright, a bit of a sanity check here. So during my quick test, I didn't like the way the base of the holster was sitting into this fixture, so I decided to open up by another 1/4 of an inch or thereabouts. I figured the least destructive way of doing that was to drill a hole in the corner and then use the scroll saw to just saw that extra piece out, which on the base does leave a thin line, which I can probably rub some glue into or something. Not that it really needs it. And so let's try it again and see if it sits in there better this time. Okay. It doesn't really change the angle that much, but it is enough to change the glare depending on where I'm sitting, as near as I can figure. I think it'll help if I open this up just a little bit here just by sanding it, because right now the front corner of the holster is rubbing on the sharp edge there, and it makes it bind a little bit. If I can soften that corner up, I think it'll move better. Okay. Yeah, that is helping, I can tell already. And the meter definitely feels more stable in here than with the old sheet metal bracket. So I think I'm on the right track. I need to, I think, build this up a little bit. I was thinking I was going to have to bevel the edge of that slot, but it doesn't seem to really be needing it. I may still do a little bit, maybe with the sander, once I put another piece on here. I can't put a piece here, although I could put here and here, but I don't think that's necessary. I think I'm just going to soften this edge and not glue anything else onto it at this point. Okay, I found this scrap of oak that I'm going to cut up. I need the thickness to be only 1/8 of an inch, so I'm going to cut it down to maybe 3/16 of an inch or thereabouts, and then plane it down to the desired thickness of 1/8 of an inch. I need 2 7-inch lengths and a 4-inch length approximately, and there's plenty of this on here to do that. So I think I'll cut 2 slats of, what did I say, 3/16 of an inch thick off of this board. It's one slat. That's sort of an awkward way to cut it because the piece will fall back down in there, and I don't have a large enough zero tolerance plate. Now let's see. Now for this one, all I need to do is shave off a little bit. That'll be, I think, easier. Is that right? I probably should have used the bandsaw for that. I have 3 slats made out of that one stick, and they're in progressively thinner layers just because I wasn't being very precise. This guy here is already just a hair over 1/8, and if it weren't for a couple scuffs on that one side from the blade, this one's ready to use, so I think I'll keep that one. And this guy will be fine once I take off a couple passes on the planer. And the thicker stick, I'll save that for some other project. this one came out really well. This one started fragmenting near the ends, but I think I can get the two long sides. Well, nearly. I can get one long side, the other long side, and the short side out of this piece. I'm just setting the fence by putting the assembly between fence and blade. And now that should be just a hair less than 1 inch. About, yeah, that's just perfect. So I'm gonna rip those. I'm a little bit leery about using the table saw to cross-cut these. I'll have to be very slow with it so it doesn't tear them. Okay, so these are plenty long enough, and if I push them down to the table, they're even the same height, which is what I wanted. Same thing here, the height came out perfectly. I still need to trim these down though to make that fit. And then this piece is long enough for the face, and again, the correct height. So now I have to saw off on 3 sides, this side, and this side, the equivalent thickness of these. Okay, I've got this side glued up. I'm going to put the one slat on it, and I'm going to align the rear of it and let the front hang off, and then I'll trim that dimension later. Actually, I'll just let it hang a little bit on both sides. That's just easier. And then I have to do likewise on this side. Okay, that's clamped up. I'll give it a couple of hours before I go to bed. I'll trim it and then put on the face and let that dry overnight. Alright, time to do a little trimming. Got quite the thunderstorm going on outside right now. Maybe the sound doesn't get picked up by the camera. Okay, and the front piece is now glued on and clamped. So I've epoxied the nut into the hole, into the recess there, and I've used the extra epoxy I mixed up to just sort of do a half-assed fill of this slot I was obliged to cut there. Okay, after the glue's dried and I did some sanding on it, I got the sides smooth, rounded the corners. Sanded off the excess glue. Got that nut down flush. Verified everything still works. You know, it does rock a little bit, but it's much more stable than it was. And the main part is it doesn't push backwards when I do this, or when I'm trying to change this. It doesn't just fall over like it did before. And probably it'll be better in the slightly tipped back position as long as there's not a glare issue. Yeah, that's even better. So I need to put some varnish on it and then decide if I want to put any kind of an anti-slip surface on the back side here. Okay, slapped a coat of varnish on there. And this not being a fine piece of furniture, I just varnished all surfaces, and they're sitting up on some inverted drywall anchors. My basement's always so cold in the summer from the air conditioning, and the winter just because it's cold, that I have to use the heaters, the heater fans, to get varnishes and paints to dry. And in this instance I decided to risk it by just putting it outside in the sun. It's about 97 degrees out here and breezy. Hopefully no pieces of garbage will blow by and get stuck in the varnish. We'll see. Okay, first coat sanded, second coat. Drying it outside actually worked quite well. Okay, just to keep it from slipping around on the bench top, I'm going to try putting just a piece of sandpaper on the bottom. If that doesn't work, I can peel it off, and there's some specialty paint that has a real grippy surface. I can try that. Alright, rubber cement spread on both the back of the sandpaper and the bottom of this. Just want to let that dry overnight. Okay, rubber cement's all dried. I think this thing is complete. Well, it was a good initial effort, but I can see no point in hanging on to this. It fits into the space on my equipment mini bench, whatever I decided to call it, I've forgotten already. And dropping the fluke in there. So again, it expands the base area as much as possible given the constraints of the location, and it should provide the most stable platform that does not allow it to keep falling over on its back because the kickstand doesn't have anything to keep it in position. Okay. Well, that's much better. It's just staying in position when I turn the knob. Big improvement. This one has worked out, and it's not going anywhere. It's stable in position. Success!